Welcome to the At the Coalface podcast with your host, Jason Greenwood. This podcast is all about what it's really like in the trenches of digital and e-commerce. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the At the Coalface podcast. I'm super excited to introduce to you today and welcome Andy Greenawalt from Storyhub to the podcast. Welcome, Andy.
Thank you so much, Jason. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure to have you here. And you're based in New York, or I guess you're right in the center of New York.
Just about 50 minutes outside in Connecticut, Fairfield, Connecticut. So it's a quick train ride.
Fantastic. And you said when we were in the lead up to this conversation, you said you've spent a lot of time elsewhere, a lot of time outside New York, a lot of time traveling around in previous businesses. And now you're close to the thriving hub that we call New York, with lots of famous people like Gary Vaynerchuk based in New York.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, my career of building SaaS businesses, started my first SaaS company in 1997 and was all over the country working in different industries. And but now, yeah, right near New York, and obviously the hub of all things media, as well as direct to commerce, direct to consumer. So it's a great place to be. Lots of energy.
Exciting stuff. And now let's talk a little bit about Storyhub. Now, as I have understand it, I've never used Storyhub before. You're effectively in startup mode. You're a startup that's primarily focused on D2C brands. It's another SaaS platform. And this is designed to almost be a sentiment engine, as I understand it. So it connects, it's a platform that is designed to connect to all of your commerce technology, whether that be your e-commerce platform, whether that be your customer service platform like your Zendesks or your Gorgeouses, your live chat platforms like your Intercoms of the world, your CRMs, whether that be Salesforce, etc. It connects to other marketplaces as well, including, I guess, all of your content engines and all of your UGC engines like your Yotpos of the world, your returns engines like Loop. And then effectively what it does is it brings in all of the interaction data that you have with your customer's central hub, Storyhub. And then it generates almost like what we could think of or imagine as a social feed of information that tells a story about the sentiment around your brand at any given point in time, and presents that to you almost like in a dashboard type of a scenario, so that instead of having to trawl through these different systems to figure out what your customers are saying or their general sentiment or the amount of time on average it's taking you to respond to customers based on the different sentiment levels that they're at, it gives you true insights into the overall customer experience you're providing for your customers at any given point in time.
Yeah, so that's a great overview. We think of it as a lot more than sentiment. So our vision is, what we're doing is we're partnering with direct to consumer brands that are mission driven, to let them build deeper relationships with the customers that love them. So what we saw in the market was that there was all of this data. Humpty Dumpty got shattered, right? The systems used to be monolithic. Now we have all of these apps and all of these plugins. But the challenge is that we're blinded. We can't see the whole picture. And so our focus is on the customer experience and really trying to provide a continuous improvement engine so that these brands are loving their customers better and better every day. Because in the end, with all of those different pieces, there are a lot of friction points along the journey. And I've been an avid D2C buyer for a long time, and I'm very sensitive to the experiences that I get. You buy once, and then these guys are clearly a work in progress. And so the news feed, as you talked about, we said, okay, how do we provide the CX team, customer experience teams, with a facility that really lets them get better every day? And so the news feed is broken down into daily, weekly, and monthly sections. So the daily sections, these are things that are super tactical, because these folks are on the other end of customer experiences all day, every day. So what do they need to be successful, to keep the customer top of mind, to keep the customers as people in the center of their mind, not just the KPIs? And so we organized it that way, and really worked with a lot of CX leaders. Ben Siegel at Pear is customer number one. And so it was really about figuring out, what did they need, when did they need it, and how do you move the needle? because as I've heard you talk about, and really our motivation is how do we take those customers that they found the product interesting, they took themselves out of the default mode from shopping with Amazon, they went to a specialty D2C provider, and then they're wanting, we think that we need to do better. And we need to do better on the customer's experience. We need to make it memorable. And that's all about a lot of little improvements. And so Storyhub was built to do the analytic work across all of these applications so that we could surface stories every day, every week, every month, so that the D2C brands are giving better and better experiences to the customers that love.
Exciting platform, and it sounds like there's almost it feels, or at least it reads like, from what I can tell from the website, it reads like this is a modular platform. So you've got this almost like a daily stream. You can think of it almost like a news feed from a social media platform. You've got a daily forecast of what's likely to be happening during the day and the things that you're going to need to be dealing with as a business, the outstanding tickets, the cases, the likely volume that's going to be happening, that's going to be facing your team throughout the day. And this is primarily, it feels like it's primarily targeted at customer service and customer care teams. And then you've got these early warnings to help you stop the firefighting. This is to help you understand where the data is coming from that might be indicating a larger, broader issue that you need to deal with as a business. Customer rescue, so that you can really understand the ones that are high risk of being perhaps lost because of the sentiment that they have across what they're saying in their tickets, for example, in a Zendesk or a Gorgeous. And then you've got other kind of almost modularized components of the technology that really are focused on allowing customer service teams to better engage, or more proactively is probably a better word, more proactively engage with customers, whilst also providing effectively dashboard information to senior managers, senior leaders, C-suite people, so that they can get a very high level, sort of 50,000 foot view of what's going on in their business as it relates to CX, customer experience.
Exactly. And so when you think about the customer's experience, and again, this is something that we've looked at millions and millions of interactions. Basically, you have different friction points. Someone says, okay, I'm going to do business with this brand. They do it, and either it's a bad experience or it's just an unmemorable experience. And so we really looked for the anatomy of that friction. Is it just a clunky process? Is it just the transition between chat and tickets, or chat and call, or whatever the different channels that folks are using? It's really awkward. The delta between these two things is really material. Or is it something that's based on dynamics or cycles? Hey, there's a heavy volume, a bunch of marketing went out, so the teams are getting hit, and therefore the wait times are getting all jacked up. Is it a product? We see this all the time, where there's just something happened with a lot of a product and it doesn't fit right, it breaks, the leg falls off, whatever it might be. The reality is that every customer that gets that broken product is going to have a bad experience. And if they have a bad experience, it's one and done. We're underwater on our CAC. And then you have the point that you made around the specific customer rescues. So this is looking at the wait times, looking at interactions. Is there possibly a challenge communicating with someone? So there are too many back and forths. Maybe there's emotional escalation. So we're looking at all of these different dimensions continuously, so that we're finding every friction point, and again, surfacing it in this super easy way, because we describe the interface as the easiest interface that you already know how to use, because it's a newsfeed and it's highly social, and you can share to Slack, and you can share things with the team, with your management, whichever direction you want to go. But it's all around finding the friction points in the experience, so we can change that repeat customer buying behavior. Because the CX leaders approached us in the early days and they said, how do we get CX a chair at the adult table? And it's like, well, you got to drive growth, because they wanted to be seen not as a cost center, but as a growth driver. And as you well know, that the dynamics of one and done purchases in these businesses. I built a SaaS business in 1997, and we learned over the subsequent decade that we couldn't have a help desk. We needed to have customer success. Well, really, COVID has introduced this lost decade, and it was a decade of learning where direct-to-consumer brands would have realized, hey, we're all in the recurring revenue business. If we have to pay this much in CAC for every purchase, we're done. This is the tide of COVID plus mountains of VC money blinded everyone to that. but we need to get better at loving our customers. And I think, at least from my experience, companies that truly love their customers, it's not easy. It's operationally a hard thing to do. But we think that's the key to brands that are going to win. And that's the thing that Storyhub wants to be a part of.
Makes sense. Now, you are not designing Storyhub to be a replacement for any of those customer service or touch point channels that a business may already have in their standard workflows of what they're doing, whether that be order notes inside of a Shopify order, whether that be a help desk ticket in a Gorgeous or a Zendesk or in a CRM platform where they're managing cases in a CRM, or whether it's user generated content. You are designing this purely as an internal tool as opposed to a customer facing tool. This is really designed to be a visual storytelling and highly engaging experiential platform for internal teams so that they can start to better understand the holistic impact of every single engagement and touch point with a customer along their journey with you, right from consideration, right through transaction, right through potentially, in some cases, either a faulty product or an unhappy customer and reverse logistics and everything in between. It's designed to turn this into effectively an internal storyboard that then communicates very effectively across the entire team of what both the collective sentiment of customers is at any given point in time, where we're actually at tactically in servicing all of these customers across all of these channels, but also trying to create a vision of where we want to get to and setting some target KPIs that this system helps them monitor to tell us, to take the temperature of the room, so to speak, and tell us how are we doing across these benchmarks that we're trying to maintain as a business as we interact with our customers.
Exactly. We describe it as a smart layer. So if you look at the ecom tech stack, the CX tech stack, what it really lacks is a smart layer that pulls it all together. And as long as everyone's only looking at a piece of the pie, they're never going to see the whole picture, because your customer's journey leaves these, what we think of as data footprints, all across these different systems. And as long as your focus is on the data representation in the individual places, your focus isn't on and we think the brands that will win will focus on their customers as people. And so that was where we imagine, like, hey, there's this layer that's missing. and we think it's a smart layer that pulls it all together, because to your point about bringing the team onto the same page, we made it social so the teams could share and collaborate on this information, because ultimately it's about building a customer-centric culture. And what builds cultures? Stories that people can ruminate on. They can read the monthly stories that we produce. Our background as a business is doing data research for the likes of YouTube and Nuance and Uber, and doing large scale customer analysis for some of the biggest brands in the world. So we're doing those things not on what has typically been a project and episodic basis. You field a survey. We're doing that kind of research out of the operational data, so that you have the daily tactical stuff that we've talked about, the weekly things, summaries, customer of the week, things that customers have shared with us, things that can create thin the wall between your team and your customers. And then on a monthly basis, deep dive research. What's different about the customers that are choosing to do business with us today? What are the ones how do customers that are one and done differ from the ones that repeat? What are the patterns? Are there different cohorts within that? So we're doing all of that analysis under the covers. And when there is something meaningful, we surface it as a story. So it's this continuous analytics layer running, again, as a smart layer against all of those tools to give the brands, and we're starting with CX, but you probably see the obvious applications for other areas in the business as well.
Definitely. And brands have often historically, in my experience, tried to start capturing some of this using NPS, so Net Promoter Score, and sending out Net Promoter Score surveys. And as you say, that's typically an episodic or an occasional type of a scenario, or even if it's part of a standard marketing automation flow, obviously it doesn't go out to every single customer after every single purchase, etc. And so there are these specific cohorts that the NPS surveys go out to at different points in time, because you don't want to wear the customer out by sending them the surveys. But what your platform effectively does, as far as I can tell, is it's almost like a constant NPS at any given point in time, that you can take the temperature of how those customers are feeling, how much interaction they're having with you. Is it a good interaction? Or is it a positive or a negative interaction? How fast are we turning these tickets and these issues around, particularly if we detect that there is an issue going on that maybe the customer hasn't even told us about yet. So we've got returns that are coming through, loop returns, for example, and we might know, for example, that our return form or our returns pouch has taken 2 weeks to get to the customer, and we want to get there in 2 days. So we know for a fact that it's likely to result in not a great returns experience for our customer. So there's different waypoints along the way that you can predictively assume and analyze that the customer is not going to have a great experience, even if they haven't told you yet that they are unhappy. And so I guess it's about how can we predict these points at which we're introducing friction into the journey and the experience with our customer. And we want to actually cut those off at the pass. We want to improve those before it turns into a genuine problem, and before we've turned the customer off and turned them away from ever buying from us again. And then secondarily, I guess it begs the question, on the other side of the Storyhub, where you're currently publishing this out to a feed, it feels like a natural extension of this over time would be to push out some of these cohorts, push out some of these segments, push out some of this information into a CDP, for example, or push out this information into a marketing automation platform, or push out this information back into a CRM platform, or a data mining platform, or a BI tool, where it can take on new uses outside of the pure Storyhub experience. So maybe you can speak a little bit to that. First of all, we're not replacing things like NPS, but we're augmenting them. And maybe you're even taking data feeds from an NPS engine, but also on the other side, there's probably many uses for the data that Storyhub is aggregating outside of the pure feed type of experience.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So we absolutely take in, so the NPS, we have internally, we have a model we call the happiness index. And so the happiness index has basically positive drivers and negative drivers, both declared, inferred from their, you talked about sentiment, there's emotional spectrum, there's rates of escalation, there's all sorts of linguistic analysis where we have that, whether it's from the service channel, from social conversations, from UGC, what have you, and then behavioral dimensions, which is purchasing frequency, volume, wait times, returns, all of those different dimensions. So we've modeled all of that into a happiness index that we use as a sensitivity mechanism for the generation of stories. So we know across brands what's generally, what are customers tolerating, what is best in class, and work people towards. We think of the Storyhub model as this idea of nudge. There was a book by Thaler on nudge, because people, when you're dealing with the people part of a business, it's taking a data feed and splicing it and dicing it and cutting a cohort and sending it to Klaviyo or whatever. Like, that'll work each time, every time. But when you're dealing with that final touch point, that final human interaction, it's about a nudge. It's about getting them better over time, getting them more customer focused, more connected with the customers. Therefore, as they're interacting, it's getting better and better. So we have the happiness index that's driving all of that behind the scenes. We imagine that being public facing. It's at some point right now, it's an ugly engine that we use to measure and weigh things. But you're absolutely right. The integrations with the likes of a Klaviyo or the CDPs for those things. But for D2C brands, we ultimately see Storyhub as their data part, that we provide the facility so they're not building their own data pipelines. They're not pushing data lakes and doing all the work with Looker and all of those things, that ultimately, as we work with more and more brands, they're asking for stuff. They're asking for different perspectives. And each one of those questions is going into a story catalog. So when you think about the stories that get produced, think about Netflix. Think about a content catalog, because all D2C brands, every brand is unique, but there's common DNA. And so that you have the common DNA of the customer's expectations that are constantly being leveled up by the industry. And then you have the common DNA of how these businesses actually work. So between those two things, we're basically creating this content catalog that is a resource for the industry. So rather than them having to staff data scientists in this market at those price points, we think that an entirely better experience can be had for them from their data, because when they build out their data teams, they tend to get not that much for a lot of money.
Definitely. And so if we think of almost Storyhub as being like a combination, almost like of maybe a Zapier combined with a Power BI for CX, and then obviously the visual storytelling part added on to that, then it feels to me like you're the middleware platform. So think of it almost like a Zapier hub in the middle that connects all these disparate systems together and standardizes them and normalizes the data, puts it through your engine of transformation, data transformation, and visualization. And then we're putting it through that Power BI type of a tool to generate the type of data feeds that we want to generate based on different rules. And then we're spitting that out in a visual way that's easy for CX teams to consume and act on in near real.
And that's exactly the case. So let me just give you an example, because I think it helps. An early warning around a product defect of some kind. So we work with some big brands that have all the data scientists, they have all the pipelines, they have all the Power BIs, they have all the stuff. And yet this garment that's supposed to be immediate is a small in this batch. And so was it the wrong template? Was it the wrong label got sewed on for whatever reason? But the brand might offer 1,000 SKUs, and this thing would be lost in the sauce forever. So they would have 150 units out, whatever the lot was, and it would take them a month to figure that out. And so there's all of this data, and it just wasn't being the traditional data approach wasn't touching it to get the business actual actionable intelligence that they could use to affect their customers' experience. Like, it just wasn't happening. And so my background, I built a cybersecurity company. We built the first security in the cloud company starting in 1997, ended up securing about 15% of the US financial industry. And so my brain is always thinking about, how do I look at data in real time? How do I cull through it, find the things that matter, and make sure that the things that matter get to the people who need it so that action can be taken? So our thinking at Storyhub was always around that. How do we give D2C brands an experience where we're finding what matters really fast, we're getting it to them really fast, and then we're getting it to them in a way that they can understand and act really fast, because the only thing that matters is speed. And so those traditional tools, like you can look at them and say, okay, this does that, and this does that, and step one, step two, step three. But the reality is step one, step two, step three in the traditional world takes, a month if it happens. And in our world, it's 473 milliseconds. So we're just, and therefore we can get to things that other people don't get to. And that was the process of the build over the last 2 years, is saying, okay, what do people really need to run these businesses? And then how can we use the data to inform it? And therefore you start to build all the different multidimensional models around products, around customers, around segments, around cohorts, around rates of change. There's a lot of data wonkiness that goes in behind the scenes, all to just make sure you achieve the promise of getting the right information to the right person at the right time.
And to just follow your use case to to a logical conclusion of usability inside the business. I guess if we shipped out 150 or 500 or 1,000 of those shirts or those tops, those whatever they might be, that are ostensibly a medium, but they're actually a small. From there, if we had let's say we had 5 customers of that cohort of 150 or 500 or 1,000 that made this complaint that it was either mislabeled or missized, one of the two, or possibly a combination of both, then obviously at that point, we can be proactive once we see this kind of red coming to the surface here. And we say, hey, we know that the sentiment around this is not good. We know that there's been 5 tickets filed in Gorgeous around this, that this product or 5 of these have been returned via loop because they were the wrong size, and that was the return logic behind this. Surface that as a red alert, and then I guess for a marketing team or a procurement, there's lots of action points off the backside of this, right? First of all,
Right.
the procurement team or the design team may have to work with, say, a contract manufacturer to find out where the problem actually was, and that's one stream of work internally. We've got procurement, which may have to figure out, hey, do we have any more of this in stock? Do we need to take it off the shelves? Do we need to reduce the stock to zero because clearly this is mislabeled and we don't want to actually ship any more because it's going to create a terrible customer experience? Or do we need to put new labels on them so that they reflect the right size? Then we have the marketing and maybe the CX team, or maybe even the customer experience team or the service teams that then need to perhaps send out an email to every single customer that one of these products was shipped to proactively and say, hey, we have been advised and we've been alerted to the fact that this product may have been mislabeled. And so for some customers, this doesn't fit as they would expect it to fit based on the size that is on the product. And so there's many streams of work that have to happen behind the scenes. And there's many teams that are cross-functional that need to be involved. But if they don't have access to the cross-functional data, which Storyhub provides, then they don't know what actions they need to take cross-functionally to resolve this ultimately, both at the root cause end, but also at the customer experience end of the story, right?
Yeah, you're laddering through it perfectly, Jason, because what the reality is that we detected that because we have the loop return data and we have the Shopify data. Because you can't talk about it all the time where, oh, I saw this spike in tickets around something there. It's a big problem. I saw, spike in tickets around this pair of pants. Well, the reality is, yeah, you saw a 50% increase in those tickets, but we sold 4 times as much. So the actual rate of issue is decreasing. And unless you connect the pieces of data together, you have no perspective on it. And so in that example, if people like looking at their individual pieces, they would have found this issue weeks later, month later, whatever that time frame is, and started the process that you were outlining of who does what a month from now. Instead, we find out about it now. We're on the phone, and one of my favorite customer experience things was at Starbucks, and they gave me the wrong coffee at the drive-through. Well, I loop around, and they don't miss a beat. They hand me a card. It says sometimes the cup is half empty. The next one's on us. It's excellent. You failed. Like to err is human. You just fix it, and now you look like a hero. And I've repeated that story 1,000 times because it's memorable. That how many companies don't do it. And so if you can do it now, that what would have been disappointing, that the company is mindful enough on your behalf to proactively communicate with you. Okay, that's fine. Things happen. We're as consumers, I think we're all savvy and we understand there's a lot of moving parts, but like that little thing can create a really great experience that earns their second purchase. And it's like all of those little things are lost in the sauce because everyone's looking at KPI 1, KPI 2, KPI 3, and not the whole picture.
And for you guys, where are you at? I realize you're still in startup mode, sort of almost stealth mode to a degree, but when do you think that V1 of the product is going to be ready to come out of that sort of beta phase that you're in now and actually be formally released to market to where brands can start plugging these tools in? And I'm guessing that I don't see any pricing on the website. We could talk about that shortly, but I'm guessing that you might offer a free trial for a week or something like that. You're plugging into these SaaS platforms, so presumably you've got an API suite both on the inbound end and on the outbound end so that people can connect various different systems easily to Storyhub. And then you've got these default connectors, out of the box connectors, which appear to be largely plug and play. You just enable them and you give them the permissions that they need, and bang, you're away laughing. And how close are we to that sort of formal V1 MVP launch of the platform?
Yeah, no. So we have the first customers on the platform. So we have paying customers. So that was a great coup earlier this quarter, excuse me. And so that's ready to go. Really, what we're doing is we're selectively taking on 3 to 4 customers at a time because there are different, what we're working through is you have apparel companies, you have subscription companies, you have companies that food service ones. So there are just a number of data models behind each one of these. So 2022 is very much are methodically taking a small number of brands, working through the process, because the startup of the process is actually, we run 3 2-week sprints. And so the first sprint is what we call CX X-ray. And so that's where we just reach into every lick of data we can get through the APIs and pull together all of the modeling. So this is all the cyclicality, all the general patterns on product velocities, customer behaviors, where does churn happen, what are the different deltas between these things, what actually drives the dynamics of the business. So we spend the first sprint figuring that out. Then we get together, we have an insight briefing with the brand, we show them our findings, we suggest the first sort of flow of stories. So what are the customer rescues that we need? What are the early warnings that we need? What on a daily basis do you as a CX leader need to be ready to own your day? The forecast tuning. So the second 2-week sprint is all on our side. So that's where we go back and do all the story tuning for that which we agreed on, because during that meeting, the brand might have some suggestions, some asks. So then we go back and the harness gets all assembled, and then it gets delivered. So at 4 weeks, they're getting their production flow. And then the next 2 weeks is really just a tuning sprint where we'll meet twice in that 2-week period. Just, hey, can we get this? Can we do this? The frequency change on this, and a little bit of content adjustment, and then they're off and running. So the way that we're doing it is with a 90-day pilot period. So it's free for the first 90 days. So we go through that process with the brand, and before they're on the hook. So that's our model.
And is the vision ultimately to take all these learnings across these different data models, these different verticals, these different endpoints that you're taking data in from and ingesting data from, and you're normalizing data from? Is the ultimate vision to make this a completely self-serve, plug-and-play product, or is there always going to be an element of that white glove onboarding that will always be part of the platform in the way that businesses onboard the platform into their operations?
Sure. Yeah. The answer is we'll be figuring it out on our roadmap. We're working with brands, mid-sized brands for most of this year, then going to the next larger category of brands as this catalog works its way out. And then ultimately in late 2023 is where everything is built out to such a point that then we can turn on smaller guys with very little legwork and let them just plug and play it, as you said.
Nice to hear that you got that democratization plan on your roadmap, because oftentimes these technologies, they're inaccessible by the small guys, and both in terms of inaccessible in terms of both cost of the platform and onboarding the platform into the business, and in terms of the SaaS fees, the monthly fees, for example, for subscriptions, but also their ability to leverage and utilize the platform as well without a team, an internal data team, to help manage and use the tool to the fullest. So it's great to hear that you have that concept of democratization built into your roadmap, that sure, you're fairly and squarely an enterprise, maybe a mid-enterprise platform for today. And those are the types of businesses that can justify the expense of onboarding the platform into the business and spending on it long term, because it's going to generate so much value for them. But I guess in the long term, being able to democratize that technology and bringing it back down to the smaller guys as well, it feels like a good way to get back.
And we're all about, we believe in diversity. The economic diversity that Shopify represents is absolutely tremendous. And that the way that it grows entrepreneurs, we believe is societally important. And it's something that we're all in on, and therefore want to get to that turnkey. What we realize is that you can't get to this level of sophistication like in one click without a bunch of work. The bigger brands happily pay because it's a fraction of the cost of a single data science. And you get a world-class team working specifically. We are focused on the metrics that matter. And so even if you don't ask us, we're still focused on the metrics that matter. And so we believe that work is best funded. I know a lot of folks in SaaS have taken this route, but ultimately getting to that larger audience, because it's incredibly exciting. We see the direct-to-consumer businesses as the counterpoint to Amazon and Walmart and Target and the other super big players, they're default mode commerce. And the direct to consumer brands represent intentional commerce. Like you have to choose to do business with them. And you're choosing to do business with them because you're into what they're doing. They're authentically into whatever it is that they're into. And that's really cool. Like I want a world with more of that. I love the craft beer movement. It's a great thing because it brought diversity to a world that didn't have it. I'm an old enough guy that I remember when there were 6 beers available in the world, and it wasn't a good time. A counter to the monolith is ultimately our mission.
And how do you guys make your money? Presumably you charge a fee for actually onboarding brands onto the platform. And then as you are a SaaS platform, I'm guessing you have a subscription model whereby they
Yep.
pay a monthly fee for access to and use of the platform. And I'm guessing that maybe there's a connector fee, i.e. the number of endpoints that are connected to the platform might affect the subscription pricing, or maybe it doesn't. So help us understand how you guys make money as a platform.
Sure. Sure. So as we sit here today, it's a super simple pricing model. We understand that the number of data connectors may likely be a lever in the future, but right now we basically have small, medium, and large. Is $12,000 a year, mediums $24,000 a year, and large is $60,000 a year for larger brands. We're just keeping it super simple. What we're seeing early is the impact that we're having is well north of a 10x ROI, because what we're doing is we're levering that repeat business pretty quickly and pretty aggressively, because we're taking friction out of the system, and it's when we attack that friction. A lot of times in our conversations, just there hasn't been a lot of love paid to that post-purchase process. And folks still think of it as marketing or retention and not an experiential dimension. So the ability for us to have a big impact quickly is there. So it's super exciting.
And how do you classify small, medium, and large? Is that based on revenue through their e-commerce platform or total revs across the business? Or how do you put them into those buckets of small, medium, and large?
Yeah. So right now, small is sub 5 million, and then 5 million to 25 million is medium, and 25 million and up is, and then obviously we'll have a break point for enterprise. So we don't, if Warby Parker shows up, we'll have another conversation.
Of course, a bespoke pricing model for the biggest end of town.
Exactly.
Makes sense. Now, we're coming to the end of our time together, and I do really appreciate your time. I appreciate your thinking on this. Look, this is something I've never seen anything like it before in the industry at all. There may be competitors to you out there that I haven't heard of, but I certainly have never seen anything like Storyhub before. So it is always exciting to see, particularly technology that democratizes CX cross-functionally across an entire organization, because CX really shouldn't just be the responsibility of customer service or customer care. It is everybody's responsibility across the whole of the company. And I very much feel that Storyhub achieves that, or helps a business achieve that, by making sure that the data points that affect a customer's experience with your brand are democratized across the whole of the business, so that those levers across the whole business can be pulled in tandem to help level up the customer's journey with you over time. That's almost the holy grail of D2C brands, is how can we progressively get better as a business over time at creating hyper loyal, hyper excited, hyper evangelistic customers that are going to be out there evangelizing our brand on our behalf, and effectively mobilizing customers as salespeople, customers as evangelists on behalf of our brand. And so it feels very much like Storyhub can become a key component in that ambition that brands have today to remain very sticky with their customers, especially given radically rising CAC cost, as we discussed. Now, as we come to the end of our time together, I'd love to turn the tables on myself, turn the microphone over to you and say, hey, what is a question you have for me? And I'd love to do my best to give you the best answer that I possibly can. So over to you. Hit me with your best shot, and we'll see what we can do.
Okay, Jason, with all your experience over the 20 plus, what brand has delivered the most magical customer experience for you? And
it's funny, that's a very good question, because I do probably in excess of 90+% of my shopping online. And to be honest with you, I'm going to give you an answer that you may not be expecting, and maybe even the audience isn't expecting. And this is through my local grocery store. This is through my local Pack and Save grocery store. They're a big box grocery store. And through the pandemic, they were really pushing customers towards click and collect. So I had never consistently shopped online before for groceries. I'd always gone in. And then during the pandemic, I switched entirely, and then I did 100% of my grocery shopping online and through click and collect. And so I had a great experience through their online store. Their online store was fast. It was easy to find things. It wasn't the most beautiful thing in the world, but it was highly functional, very easy to select a collection slot for click and collect. They allowed you to store your credit card with them, which a lot of brands still don't do for God knows why. And I could make repeat purchases. It was easy to see what the service fees were going to be. It was just a very good online experience. But the thing that stood out to me and continues to stand out to me to this day that makes me want to continue to use click and collect is that the people actually servicing the click and collect, when I go to collect the items, they actually know by my name. When I walk in, they say, "Hey, Jason, how was your week?" I really feel genuinely valued. And that's and I've dealt with probably 10 different people on their click and collect team. Every single time without fail, they've been super excited to see me. They've said my name by name. They've called me out by name. They have, if there's ever been a mistake, which very rarely, but occasionally there's a mistake, or they forget to give me one of my bags or something like that, they resolve it immediately. They'll even call me if they get my order ready sooner than what they expected to get the order ready. They will ring my cell phone and they will say, "Hey, Jace, we've got your order ready early. If you want to come and collect it early, that's fine. You're more than welcome to. Otherwise, we can put it in the locker for you." So the level of personalized service was totally unexpected from a supermarket. And that has caused me to I've gone out of my way. I've filled out one of those contact forms through their online store to tell them how amazing their click and collect team is. And I hardly ever go to that much effort to seek out a contact form to tell a business how amazing their staff are. But in this case, it is completely justified. And it is just a seamless experience from online right through to collection. And if there's any issues, actually resolving those issues way beyond my expectations. And I tell you, it's a customer experience that is pretty rare in New Zealand. Even now, with all the amazing technology that is out there, there are not many brands in New Zealand that can match that level of experience and that level of consistency across that.
And I'm sorry to jump in there, and they had to do it a lot. Like they had to do it a lot. So they had to get it right the first time and then repeat it over and over again. And a grocery store has to do that so much more than most D2C brands. And they delivered an experience that I have never had with a single D2C brand. That's awesome.
And isn't that sad? Isn't it sad?
Yes.
And when you think about the logistics and the complexity of grocery and the fact that they can get it right 99% of the time, and even when they don't, the service recovery experience is memorable in itself. The fact that, and almost no margin, they're one of the tightest margin businesses in the world, and yet they have created an experience that is truly memorable. And that, you're right, I don't think I've had this level of experience with too many D2C brands that I can remember off the top of my head. And it should be a lesson, I guess. It should be, I guess, the canary in the coal mine that if grocery can get this right, that D2C brands better start leveling up. Because as you rightly pointed out in the beginning of our conversation, their last best experience becomes their new normal, or their new normal expectation, right? And so if a customer has ever bought off of Amazon before, or if they've ever bought off of one of the amazing D2C brands that do an amazing job, and I take that back. I had a really good experience with Allbirds, which is a D2C shoe brand. And I had a great experience with them. The unboxing experience, the shipment experience, the communications experience was absolutely amazing. And their website experience was amazing as well. So that's another brand that stands out to me as creating a really incredible end-to-end customer journey. But it's still pretty rare. Sad, considering that we've had a good solid 10 years of D2C maturity happening, and the tools have gotten 1,000% better in the last decade. But yet we still have brands that are, to a degree, over reliant on the tools and not as focused on brand experience that those tools.
There's also a lot of DNA that comes out of tech companies and certainly on the customer support side that comes out of like telecommunications and utility. So there's tech companies are not known for their customer love, right? I dare you to talk to someone at Google. And so I think that there's a lot of tech DNA and telco, candidly, telecommunications call center DNA that really the brands need to overcome and reimagine, and Allbirds is absolutely killing it and getting it right. But I think that's like that. The first step is admitting it.
It certainly is. Sandy, it's been amazing chatting with you. I really appreciate your time. Can't wait to see you guys get out of this early sort of almost beta stage, this walk before you run stage. Love to get you back on the maybe a podcast in maybe 12 to 18 months, see how you've matured, see how you've been able to work downstream, upstream, etc. See what new connectors you have at that particular point, see how the platform has matured, the new features and functions that you brought to the platform. And I wish you all the best, because this is a gap in the market that I haven't seen anyone else be able to fill very well. And I wish you all the best, because I think this is a super important part of the industry that we all need to take some ownership for.
Thank you so much, Jason. I really appreciate being on the podcast, and you're a content animal.
Thanks for listening to the At the Coalface podcast. If you want more At the Coalface, you can subscribe to our premium e-commerce and digital newsletter, At the Coalface Digest.